but it's time to start another subject near and dear to my heart, program architecture.
Indeed. Now, all of this week's attendees will automatically receive a program architecture training certificate posted to their Todd account. We're using these town halls actually as a way to offer an update on training for all of our associates. Keep in mind, these training certificates are actually used as our BD people go through Todd to help make a selection in terms of who gets to get staffed on what opportunities. So it will advance your standings when our BD staff look at your profiles.
Yeah, that's so true, AJ.
Indeed. So now let's start off with a brief overview of program architecture. We're going to do this in two parts because there's a lot to cover. And we're going to actually start with what it is, why it's important, what makes a good program architecture, and then discuss the 5 key gate reviews associated with creating one. Right, Jacque?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
So AJ, as you mentioned earlier, we're going to talk about the Essential Guide to Program Architecture, which is a book we developed because we really felt that there was no other books about this in the market, and it's a critical part of not only the proposal but also the post-award part of a program.
It is, and this is really the culmination of something that started back in the mid-90s, right, Jacque?
Yeah, it did. Yeah, exactly. I remember being actually even a little earlier than that. Yeah, because we were working things like it. I mean, by the time NMD came around, this was the way we were doing things.
Yeah. So, really important topic. Hope everybody gets an opportunity to actually go through the book itself. And what we're going to do this in 2 parts, right, Jacque?
That's right. Yeah. Yep. And so this first part is kind of an introduction, and we'll do a deeper dive into some of the topics as we get into the second part of this.
Okay. All right. Jacque, let's start with actually defining what program architecture is, and then please also speak to how do you know when there's actually a good program architecture?
Yeah. So although this is defined as a wheel with program architecture in the middle, it's an integral part of the proposal process, and what it really does is it integrates the elements of the proposal, the win themes, the schedules, resources, costs, and as well as the technical attributes of what's going to be delivered, and it allows us to tell a story, but more importantly, it allows us to ensure that the story that we're telling in things like the IMS is also flows through the entire proposal, and it's kind of that foundation.
Now, how do DoD customers think about it? What do they use it for?
So it's really used to a couple of things. When you start thinking about program architecture, one of the first things we do, very much like on a proposal, is we actually burst the RFP. In the case of program architecture, what we're really interested in is the technical section of the RFP itself, the performance work statements or the statement of work, and we burst that to determine what are all the requirements. And what this allows us to do is then start aligning the requirements to the win themes, allowing us to identify aligning the requirements to risk and risk mitigation activities. It allows us to also then start thinking about what's it going to take to get that work done. When are we going to do it? What sequence are we going to do this work in? And a lot of that can be trivialized by saying, well, that sounds like planning and scheduling, right? But it's much broader than that, because done right, as in any section of the proposal, as you look at it, you can find that section through the IMP in the IMS and see the story of how you're going to execute the program.
Now, I think in the end, it's customers really use it to see how executable the program
100%.
You create it, and
100%.
that's one of the most important aspects of winning competitions these days.
That's right.
Customers' confidence that you can actually do what you said you're going to do in the proposal.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Now, Jacque, as you mentioned, it really is a key part of the proposal itself, right, and the whole capture activity. But isn't it also incredibly important when you've won the program and, question is, how do you actually get the program started?
100%. If you do this right, you actually have a plan that's executable, which, again, the whole idea, as you said earlier, was to be able to pull the thread through, is this program executable? How do we know? How much risk are we assuming? Well, if it's done right, by the time you get to the post-award side of this, you actually have a plan that you can execute to.
And you know how you're going to collect your costs, you're going to know how your program's going to be organized, all of those things.
Exactly right. And if you look at this, we start this process super early in the
win strategy.
Win strategy. Exactly right.
Exactly. All right. When it's done right, it starts early.
That's right. Always. That's the SMA way.
Jacque, now how do you actually put a program architecture together? How many steps are there?
That's a great question. There's about 10 steps in our process, and there's obviously things you do in each step. But Our process is also organized by 4 major areas, which
Okay.
include, the program architecture mission. In
Okay.
other words, what are we actually going to go build or go do?
Yep.
Right. What program products or services are we going to provide? Which could be engineering as an example,
Okay.
as a part of that. The program execution organization, and that's important. This is where I think a lot of efforts go wrong, is because they think about their organizational structure as the way the company is organized, not the way
Right.
the program is going to be organized. And that's one of the reasons why we've moved to an IPT structure, because that kind of forces us into a product organization. And then, of course, there's the program summary schedule and ultimately the detail IMS, which is all kind of the time element of the effort.
Right. Now, in addition to those things, isn't there something called an integrated master plan that's also created out of the process?
Yeah, the integrated master plan is actually your roadmap and it's the thing that integrates the win themes, the WBS, OBS, the requirements. It's the thing that kind of links all those things together, so that when somebody needs to go find where is requirement, a particular requirement, they can find it in the IMP and then see where that is in the schedule, see where that is in the cost, etc.
And is that where you define the entrance and exit criteria and all those sorts of things?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly right.
And now, so every schedule, there's a logic, right, behind every schedule. So
That's right.
does the logic come from the integrated master plan?
So it doesn't come from the integrated master plan. But what it really, the logic comes from how you're going to execute. And that's a collaborative effort, talking to each of the IPTs and the product teams as to where the things can occur in parallel, where the handoffs are. That's when you start talking about the entry and exit criteria.
All right. So this is a big team effort. It's not something that you just take a couple of folks and say, go create this for me.
No,
this is sounds like it's going to have to be a very highly collaborative process.
Absolutely. It's very much like a proposal. You can't do this in a vacuum, no more than you could write the proposal in a vacuum.
How true. Now, Jacque, what's really central to the SMA way of doing things is how we design quality every step of the way into whatever product we're creating. How do we do that here with the program architecture?
Right, so there are 5 gate reviews, and I almost hate to refer to it as a gate review because that sounds like we're testing quality in, but they're key artifacts that we're developing. Just like we do with the proposal, these artifacts all are in the proposal war room, right?
Yep.
And then we have gate reviews that are periodic evaluations of the things that we're putting in there.
So how many gate reviews are there?
5.
5. Okay.
Yep, the program architecture gate review, and we do this one super early in the process. And the intent of this is to look at the entry and exit criteria and the IMP itself.
Okay.
Then the next one is the schedule summit review, and this is the whole idea behind this is start getting once we've got the IMP, we want to start developing the IMS in enough time that IMS is available to the cost volume leads, so that they're aligning costs to the way the work's going to get executed.
So important,
right? Yeah, it creates a lot of credibility when you look and say, hey, oh yeah, here's the cost, and that work's occurring in the same time frame. Then we have the baseline IMP review. And this is conducted with the proposal pink team.
Okay.
Is when we like to do this, and the intent is to get the IPT management buy-in before developing the formal IMS, the final IMS. Then we have the baseline IMS review, which is we're actually going to a final IMS product that we're going to use as the baseline, and ideally that baseline is what you carry forward into your execution. Of course, there's negotiations and things like that happen, between award and ATP. But you're using this as the foundation for that. And then the last is the schedule integration review, which is conducted before the proposal release.
Okay. And that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like out of those 5 reviews, you're actually having an opportunity to look at the parts of the integrated point of view around the program architecture, not just individual projects. That's
correct. I think one of the real important things about this is that this isn't an island in and of itself. It's not a group of planners off in a corner pulling something together, because this feeds the proposal. It feeds the cost volume. It drives the technical volume. So there's a number of things that sit on top of this that allow the proposal to ultimately tell the story it needs to tell as well.
All right, fantastic. Now, Jacque, can you tell us a little bit about the first review?
Yeah. So as I said, the program architecture review is the first review, and this happens very early in the process, right around the win themes, right after win theme development. And here your win strategies and entry criteria. In fact, what we've done with this is we've cut the way we think about IMPs and all the rest. we architected this part of the book to kind of flow that way. So we identify the entry criteria, when things are conducted, who participates, and the exit criteria. So on this one, we've got when themes in the program vision are need to be in place, ground rules and assumptions. And this is something that is actually part of the program architecture process, is we set up what our ground rules and assumptions are around how we're going to architect the IMS, the levels of detail and those types of things. The IPT organization, the teaming structure, which is really important because, we've seen this how many times. You've got to get schedules from your subs. You've got to know who they are, right? Mm-hmm. And are they simply providing a commercial item deliverable, or they're actually going to do NRE engineering that has to be integrated into the overall IMS? Work breakdown structures, the integration of the WBS and the SAO. Spec trees are important for this because, again, you've got to know what it is
what you're doing,
right?
Yep.
Program level events, which is a whole topic we'll get into, I believe, next time. We're going to talk about, what are key events.
And many of these are actually driven by the customer's requirements, but some are also by the company itself.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Yeah. And then the top level summary schedule. And then this is as early as practical, but no later than by the draft RFP.
And this is the precursor step to creating the IMP.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool. Now, who's involved?
So who's involved in this is the program manager, the proposal manager is key, the program architect, and the IPT lead. And I also like to integrate my capture manager into this process also, because they're the ones talking directly to the customer.
Good point. Good point. We should actually modify our book.
We should.
The next version to add that.
Right.
All right. And then kind of how do you know when you're done?
So what you deliver from this is the IPT and program management approved baseline documents, which consist of the government source documents as well. Yeah. So in other words, saying here's all the things we're going to use as the source for building our IMP and IMS and the identifying risk, etc.
Excellent. Now, Jacque, what's the second review in our process?
So the second review in our process is the schedule summit review. And again, we have the same entry and exit criteria approach to this. So we do a top level program schedule. Honestly, I think this is one of the most important artifacts that we develop in the program architecture, because it's the one thing that everybody should be able to walk up to the whiteboard and draw. And just that kind of that master phasing schedule associated with this.
And it's always in the proposal, right?
It's always in the proposal, right? But it becomes the guiding light for everything we're talking about in terms of how things are going to get done. And if something changes, we should change the master phasing schedule. Funding constraints are important, and this is where understanding your customer becomes an important criteria.
How much a customer is going to fund by government fiscal year, for example,
right? Because if you put together a cost volume that's aligned to that, and they look at it and they say, wow, this funding is exactly the way we have money.
And the schedule has to be aligned to it, obviously.
Exactly right.
Because you're not going to do work that's not funded.
And this is where I think customer intimacy becomes a critical component to success, even on the proposal. And this is how we articulate that into the story.
Okay.
The pricing ground rules, BOE formats, not the actual BOEs, but how we're going to collect BOEs, or what level we're going to collect that data.
Methodologies, those sorts of things.
Exactly right. And then the the IMS inputs and responsibilities by IPT. So that now we're starting to give out assignments on how we're going to organize and structure this, and then subcontractor input requirements as well. And the thing about this is that it's important to get the subs integrated into the problem early, because otherwise what happens, we've seen this before, where you're chasing your subs to get information that they haven't been able to provide.
And in the SMA way, we always recommend to our clients, get your team put in place before the RFP drops.
That's right. That's right.
Because it is really, really hard to hold teaming negotiations and discussions and looking at different subcontract opportunities or options while you're actually trying a solution.
Yeah, that's why getting the trade studies done as well early is important. And you got to know what you're selling.
Yeah. And when do you do this in the process?
Yeah. So we do this ideally at the prior to kicking off the cost volume. And prior to initiating the IMS development.
How about relative to some of the key milestones in the proposal? Is this around pink team review, or
no? It's much earlier than that. This is probably about the time that the draft RFP comes out. Roughly,
or which would be maybe mod specs in the SMA process.
Exactly right.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. That's a good way to think about it. Yep. All right. Now, who's involved?
So again, program manager, cost volume lead, the IMPIMS volume lead, and then planners and So now you're introducing
Now
planners.
you're
into
bringing
this.
the detailed planners and
Right,
schedulers.
and then the pricing lead should be involved
Absolutely.
in this as well.
Absolutely. And
What do we deliver?
Yeah, what do we produce out of this?
Yeah, so the BOEs, the IMS development schedule, and tools agreement. So in
Okay.
other words, are we doing this in Primavera? Are we doing
Right.
this in project? And this, it's odd to me that there's still a lot of debate about that as we go through these things. And then ground rules and assumptions.
And on the BOE, it's really just the format, right?
Just the format.
Okay, but the most important thing seems to be agreement around the schedule, the summary level schedule.
Right. And people might think, well, so why is it that we're making such a big deal about the BOE templates? But we've all been on proposals where you get 20 different templates at different levels of things, and that's impossible.
No one ever thinks about the person or the group of people that have to write the BOEs until the end, and that is not a good idea.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, now the third review is coming up. What is the third review?
So the third review is the baseline IMP review, and so the entry criteria to that one is the approved program architecture. Again, that's looking at the technical solution, the win themes.
Okay.
It's
that first review.
Exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
The event definition, purpose, and objectives.
Okay.
And when you think about events, these are your key events, which are things like PDR, CDR,
Right.
TRR.
And that comes out of the second review because that was the summary level. Those are shown in the summary level schedule,
Correct.
right? Okay.
Significant accomplishments. So if you look at key events like a PDR, the significant accomplishments or major accomplishments are those things that are going to happen that have to happen in order to get to that event. And so it's a tiering of milestones is the way to think about it. And then each of those milestones have an accomplishment criteria, which are another set of milestones that get to each of the major accomplishments.
So now you're starting to develop a little bit of logic. It sounds like, right?
And that's
what
when you
has to
start
occur
to get
first, and then second and third. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Then and a couple of other things are your verb definitions, and again, that's really important.
So what do you mean by that?
Well, so you want to have a common language that runs throughout the proposal, as well as runs throughout the IMS itself. So you don't want to for example, PDR complete. You don't want to say complete, PDR finished, CDR complete,
Got it, okay.
right? So it's a matter of standardizing a set of verbs.
And the customers probably appreciate that, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And ideally, if you provide that set of verbs to the customer as part of your submission of the IMS, it helps them understand what you're talking about when they're reading
Actually
through
define what that is. Okay,
exactly.
Cool. Like that.
The risk mitigation and strategy and definition criteria. Also, your win strategy and themes have to be a part of this.
Yep.
And then the ground rules and
Of course,
assumptions.
always, right?
Yep.
Now, when do you do this?
We do this at Pink Team.
Okay. This is the thing that occurs at Pink Team.
Exactly. And but it's got to be prior to initiating the IMS development.
Okay.
Because if you let the scheduler, it's all about avoiding rework, right? If you don't get these things in place, then when you send your schedulers off in advance, they're gonna have to go back and fix a bunch of stuff.
Schedules, I know, for many major defense acquisition programs can be tens, if not 100,000 lines.
Yep.
So it sounds like before you actually have the team start to develop all that granularity, you really want to make sure you've got the summary level schedule put in place, right? And this is done before that detailed scheduling.
Exactly. We tend to build schedules top down.
Right.
So you start off with your key events, your major accomplishments, your accomplishment criteria. Then you start laying in your work packages and detailed tasks below that. Because interesting, a great example is I was on a program that had a 10,000 line IMS, and the Navy just kept saying there's not enough detail here, not enough detail. When we actually re-architected this, following our process, we ended up with about a 3,500 activity network, and the Navy came back and said, finally, there's enough detail in here I can understand what you're trying to tell us, right?
Okay. Incredible. Now, who's involved in this review?
So again, program manager or proposal manager,
always,
of course, right? The program manager, the program architect, of course, and then also the IPT leads.
And that's the execution team at the end, the program manager, right? And then again, when you get out of it.
So the IPT in program management approved baselines for the end.
Important.
Very important.
Very important. Right. Now, Jacque, I know we have two more reviews
We do.
to get to. So this is the fourth review. What is the fourth review?
The fourth review is the baseline schedule review. And in this review, we have the top level program schedule, that one pager we were talking about, that's been finalized. That's an input criteria, actually. And then we have the IMS that's been developed for each IPT and subcontractor. So again, you can't eat the elephant all in one bite. You've got to break it up into pieces. So by looking at each IPT, each sub, and trying to get those schedules defined, then you can focus on how they're going to integrate after that. Right. Again, the IMS ground rules and assumptions are important. Win strategy and themes. And we keep pushing that because even during the proposal phase, we always try to keep the team focused on what are the
strategy and themes,
exactly.
right? And it changes, could change.
It could change
during the proposal process, right? So it's good to always have in every review.
It is, and the thing about it is the program architect's actually responsible for documenting those things and keeping them together, because a lot of that work ultimately becomes the thing we hand off to the execution team. All the assumptions, all of the ground rules, all those things we use to develop this become the thing that we hand to them, so they know why did they do it this way, right? The risk mitigation plans, and as well, and then all of the things that you're going to get from the government. So it could be GFE, GFI, the GFX type stuff that you're going to get from the government. It has to be accounted for because those, if you're talking about, getting an engine for, we have that on one of the programs we're working now, where the government's going to furnish the engines on that aircraft as GFE. Right. Well, you got to know when that's going to happen. Right. Because that's going to drive the IMS. But test labs, we do. A lot of Navy programs. You've got ground, land-based test station facilities. You got to know when they're available. When you expect to be able to use them. And then your CDRL list is critical, or your ESTRL list if you're a sub. And then the initial resource loading of the IMS is important.
Even if it's not a requirement, would you still recommend that some level of resource loading take place during this process?
Absolutely. The thing about it is that you mentioned earlier that you're looking for creating confidence in your ability to execute the program. And if your IMS and your cost line up, even if you're not required to provide a resource loading schedule, it's the basis by which you should be doing your costs, because for most programs, the most expensive things walk in and out of the plant every day in 2 legs.
So it's a way for the customers to actually assess realism as well.
That's right.
Okay, that's cool. Right. Now, when does this occur? The last review occurred during Pink Team, so when does this occur?
Red Team. This is the one we do during Red Team.
Okay, makes sense. Which goes along with where a proposal ought to be at Red Team.
Exactly. And I've seen IMSs that were done really early, but they were out of sync, or worse yet, you're at Red Team and all you've got is a skeleton. And that's this is why you want to have a plan for the plan.
We've both been on Red Teams where that certainly was the case.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. Now, is it the same group of folks who are involved?
Pretty much the same group of folks. Program manager, proposal manager, your volume leads.
The volume leads in this case.
In this case, right? And then your IPT leads.
Got it. Now, on the exit criteria in terms of what's created, what are the key ones?
There's quite a bit that comes out of this review. Your IMS top level supports the top level schedule. So, again, now you've got to worry about horizontal and vertical integration. So all these tasks roll up, and they roll up to that same milestone in the summary schedule, or they create the same time frame that the summary schedule summarizes. Your IMS supports all of the IMP criteria, and that's important as well.
They're consistent, right? Got it.
Risk mitigation evidence.
And that's important.
It is. So many times, we talk to clients about this where when you think about risk, they're always very cautious about, we don't want to make this look too risky. But the reality of it is, if you can identify the potential risk and how you would mitigate it if it emerges, you create more credibility for yourself.
Dollars to donuts, customers will always identify it if you haven't identified it.
That's
so you better identify it and talk about it, right?
Right. It's like Admiral Wackendorf says, it's the difference between a leak and a flood.
I like that.
And then also, all your, you've identified all your deliverables are easily identified in the schedule, and as well as your government dependencies.
Cool. Now, Jacque, on to the fifth review in the process. What is that about?
So this is the schedule integration review. So in the last section, we were talking about we're building out the IMS for each IPT, for each sub. This is where we actually have now taken those, integrated them, looked at the giver receivers between each of those elements. Made sure that we're not going to hire 1 million people one week and then have only 1,000 people working the next week. So it's all the validity of the schedule and the integration points are a part of that. In addition to that, we need to complete the BOEs, which should be driven out of the resources and the resource plan. We've completed the IMS itself and the risk with risks.
Got it.
We've done an SRA, which is schedule risk assessment. That's a Monte Carlo tool that we run on schedules. And what it does is it goes through and basically identifies the execution, the most likely critical path in the schedule. Because every time you status a schedule, the critical path changes. Right, so it goes through using Monte Carlo to define which path came up the most times when we did this 1,000 times, right? And then resource loaded IMS. We've always said if required, but I don't know how else you get to good BOEs if you don't do it.
Yep.
Right. Your Cedral list or Estral list, your win strategy and themes, also your IMS introductory text. And this is important. Handing somebody an IMS and saying, go figure it out is hard. But if you take the time to build out, views and filters, as well as a document that accompanies it that says, here's all the things we've done, here's how it's organized, here's what the colors mean, here's what the verbs mean, all those things that go into it, you're now also helping the evaluators make it easier to evaluate.
Everything in our proposal process, make it easy to evaluate. Right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And then
score high.
Yes, score high. And then then also the README file for the IMS.
Got it. All right. Now, when is this done?
So we do this prior to the release for production. So this is one of the last things we do before.
So maybe before the goal team review?
Probably right around goal team. Ideally before, because your production team's gonna have enough to do after goal team.
Right.
So at least get them this, but right around that time.
Okay.
The thing about the IMS is it changes a lot throughout the life cycle of a proposal. So the schedulers have to be flexible, but at some point you got to go pens down on the IMS as well.
Nothing in a proposal is ever 99 or 100% done by the time you submit.
That's right.
Right. That's just the way it is.
That's right.
Yeah.
But you can get closer if you start early and have a approach to getting from point A to point B.
Who's involved?
So again, same the usual suspects: program manager, proposal manager, the IMPIMS volume lead. Which actually you'll notice we've been saying program architect. Well, at this point, the program architect has transitioned to become the IMPIMS volume lead, and they're focused on writing up the IMS itself.
Okay.
And then your cost volume leads and IPT
leads. All right. So I guess the exit criteria is all about having a final proposal at the end of the day, right?
That's right. You got to have your BOEs that track to the IMS, an SRA with 90% confidence, target margins, and this is always a hot topic as well. Whether your company allows for schedule margin or not, you should have an idea of where that is, because ultimately you're going to either replace it with some sort of activities that you're going to be conducting, or you're going to hold that margin, which I'm actually in favor of doing. The BOEs that match the funding profile as well as the execution plan, and then all deliverables.
So essentially, all the things that the customer's requiring in the proposal, plus your leadership team that your company is going to require before they actually approve you to submit the proposal.
That's correct.
All right. Great. Now, Jacque, we've talked about how program architecture is such a key part of our proposal process. And so the gate reviews are integrated into that process that we've been talking about. And this slide actually shows how you can think about the program architecture development relative to the different steps in the proposal process. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so as you go through capture and your win strategies, that's the work that the capture manager is doing. But once we've got, we're at the point where we're going to go after this thing and there's something to go after, you start your proposal planning process. This diagram shows it happening at draft RFP. If you can start before that, certainly, and that's always a good thing. And that's where your program architecture review and your schedule summit review, or your program architecture review occurs there. Yeah. Your proposal development and production phase has got all the other four reviews, which is the schedule summit review, the baseline IMP review, baseline IMS review, and the schedule integration review.
And these are all incredibly important things to achieve that final goal on this slide, which is a win.
That's right. That's right. 100%. And and as well as it sets up the organization to execute the program. Yeah. I've been on the receiving side of good program architectures, and I've been on the delivery side of good program architectures. And I will tell you, if you've got to deliver, it's never the same team that does both. Rarely.
True.
In an organization.
True. Even the program manager usually doesn't transition from proposal phase to the actual execution.
Exactly.
phase.
But if you can see all of the documented assumptions and get ground rules and the architecture of things, it makes it a lot easier to take that work and continue running with it. If not, the propensity is throw it away and start over.
Which is not a good idea.
Not a good idea.
Why? Because the customer just finished reading this incredibly beautiful proposal about how you're going to do things,
Yep.
and that's what they're going to expect.
Absolutely. I was on a program, $30 billion program, this was probably in the late 90s. We'd gone all the way through to the end. They get awarded the program. Coast Guard shows up on that first meeting with their IMS in hand, and they're telling them, "Oh, well, that's not where we're going. We've rebuilt that." Right?
And I'm sure the government customer's thinking, maybe we made a mistake.
Yeah. No,
Let's hope not.
Yes, exactly.
That's probably what they're thinking, right?
Yes, 100%.
All right. Well, hey, Jacque, thank you so much. Going through this first part, which actually sets us up for part 2.
It does.
Now, what are we going to cover in part 2?
So in part 2, we're going to get into the actual how you do these things, right?
Okay.
The construction of the master phasing schedule, the construction of the WBS, how we think about risks and quantifying risks, looking at the integration of all of this resource loading. So that's going to be the kind of the scope we get into the next phase.
Good. Now, the book has so much detail about that. One of the things that actually that really popped out at me in the book, there's so much data that has to be managed. So you actually have to kind of take a look at this from an information warfare, almost perspective, right?
Right.
And so, managing all those different pieces of data, I think it's incredibly important. Are we going to speak to that as well in part 2?
We will, because configuration control on any technical project any project. I mean, even the proposal is important. And so the same is true with the artifacts for the program architecture and an IMS is a huge database, and it has to be managed
as a database.
As a database.
Indeed. Right. Well, we're all looking forward to part 2, Jacque. Thank you.